Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to the webcast RoHS2, Is Your Company Ready? My name is Kate Baker, and I will be your moderator today. We have two presenters joining us on this webcast today, Kelly St. Andre, Director of Product Management, Windchill Products Analytics, PTC, and Aidan Turnbull, Director, BOMcheck. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to advise everyone that this webcast will be recorded for replay purposes. To listen to the webcast over the internet, just make sure your computer speakers are turned on and up. Go to Voice and Video on the live meeting toolbar and make sure the speaker icon is not muted and the volume is turned up. If at any point you are experiencing technical difficulties, please select Need Help from the feedback button in the upper right corner of your screen, and I'll be with you shortly via chat. If you would like to view the presentation at full screen, just press F5, then press F5 again to get back to a normal view. We will be answering your questions during the Q&A session at the end of the webcast. To submit a question, just click on the Q&A tab at the top of your screen and type in your question. We do have a full agenda for today's webcast, so if we don't get to your question during the Q&A, our presenters will answer your questions via email. And now I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Kelly St. Andre. Kelly, it's all yours.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. Today, I'm going to give you an overview of our agenda, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about me, and then about PTC. Then I'll turn it over to Dr. Turnbull, and he will give you a little bit of information about himself and BOMcheck. So let's get started. Today's agenda involves reviewing RoHS2 timelines, practical compliance management, what manufacturers need to do for compliance, and then best practice recommendations. Just a little bit about me. I'm the Director of Product Management for Product Analytics, as well as a core team member developing PTC's sustainability program. I've been active in industry committees regarding data collection standards and implementation strategies for both REACH and RoHS across multiple industries. And many of my leadership roles throughout my career have been focused on IT infrastructure, software development, environmental compliance, and sustainability. Just a little bit about me. So here's a quick introduction to PTC. PTC is one of the world's largest and fastest growing independent software companies, with 5,000 plus people focused on helping our customers improve product lifecycle processes in best-in-class technology. We've got more than $1 billion in revenue, and we're growing at 10%, profitable with global operations. In addition, 50,000 customers, including market leaders. So our customers span many industries and many countries. So let's jump right in. Product analytics plays an important role in key product development processes. This is our process framework for product development and business success. It's a comprehensive view of the product development process. The focus is on how this is distributed across organizations, as well as started in planning versus production. The key here is that the earlier companies catch potential problems in the process, the more efficient and cost-effective they can be. Product analytics has many critical capabilities and value. So our mission is to be component and bill of material analysis solution providers that enable users to assess product compliance, performance, and risk beginning early in the innovation process and throughout the product lifecycle. Some of our key capabilities and values are component characterization and data acquisition, data quality and supplier risk management, synchronization of BOMs, parts, and suppliers from multiple business systems, so various ERPs and PLM systems, component, supplier, and BOM analysis throughout the product lifecycle. Key here is early detection, impact analysis of change in products, suppliers, and even regulations across multiple dimensions, and real-time visibility of analysis results to key stakeholders throughout the enterprise. Key aim of analytics is to measure early and measure often. We've created a common platform to enable synergies around materials, supplier information, and access to the BOM, ERP, and PLM. What we've created is a modular architecture, and it's enabled us to build analytics for materials and substances, compliance, lifecycle analysis, and product cost, as well as some custom analytics for things like weight and part commonality. Using the Windchill Product Analytics platform, customers can identify risks across multiple dimensions, such as the ones that you see here. Product Analytics has the flexibility to import data from many sources and many types, as well as sharing data between your PLM and your ERP system. So this slide, really, it shows how motivated, excited, and passionate we are about solving our customer problems across many industries. Top manufacturers rely on PTC for RoHS compliance. Here are some examples of our customer base. 30% of the top manufacturers on Greenpeace's Guide to Greener Electronics are product analytics users. 2 of the top greenest electronic manufacturers rated by Greenpeace are our customers. In the medical device industry, 4 of the top 10 manufacturers. In aerospace and defense, 3 of the top 10. Communications, 3 of the top 10. Electrical equipment and appliances, 3 of the top 10. And machinery, 2 of the world's top manufacturers. We've been leading the way for quite some time. Product Analytics, in its early incarnation back in 2004, was one of the first to market RoHS compliant software solution. In addition, we keep up with continuous delivery of enhancements and industry innovations. So we also work with regulations like REACH, ELV, WEEE, Battery, JIG, and GADSL. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Aidan so he can talk a little bit about himself and tell you about BOMcheck.
Thank you very much, Kelly. It's a pleasure to be here on this joint webinar with PTC. A little bit about myself, if you haven't come across Environ before, and my role as BOMcheck Director. I've been involved in the electronics industry for over 19 years. Some of the highlights of my work include writing the UK government guidelines on RoHS and WEEE compliance in 2003, and also Eco-Design Guidelines for Electronic Product Designers, which was published by the UK government agency EnviroWise, also in 2003. My team has also represented the medical device industry and negotiations with the European Commission on the RoHS directive in 2008. And in December last year, I was appointed as the co-chair of the IPC 7052A International Standard for Materials Declaration Management. A little bit about Environ, if you haven't come across us before. We're a leading international environmental and life sciences consultancy with 1,200 staff in 70 offices across 16 countries. We carry out around 5,000 projects a year, and our revenue last year was about $240 million US. We've got a lot of experience in electronics and eco-design, starting in the late 90s with the work we were doing for the UK government to demonstrate the benefits of eco-design in the electronics industry. 2005, we launched web-based systems to manage business-to-business WEEE compliance in multiple member states. Many companies, particularly in the US, have obligations in multiple EU countries and want to have a single corporate approach to manage their compliance obligations across Europe. In 2007, we were the first organization to gain a licensed operator WEEE compliance scheme in the UK. 2007 and 2008, we also wrote several joint industry statements on RoHS and WEEE for the EU medical device industry. We wrote a joint industry guide to REACH compliance for component suppliers and equipment manufacturers, which included input from companies like Siemens, Apple, Philips, and others. That's available free of charge from BOMcheck.net. Since 2009, we've been providing integrated pan-European compliance services for WEEE batteries and packaging. Our website, b2bwee.com, provides details about that. Many companies these days find that they don't have the resources or the in-house expertise to be able to manage regulatory requirements, particularly if they have obligations in up to 27 different countries. That's why they choose to outsource it to us to manage it on their behalf. And of course, what I'll be talking about today is the BOMcheck industry-led web database for substance declaration management. which was launched in 2007. The purpose of the BOMcheck system is to increase the quality and response rate for supplier and regulatory compliance declarations by providing benefits to suppliers. Kelly's going to talk a lot today about the extremely comprehensive and important tools that PTC provides to roll up data to produce the technical files necessary for RoHS2. But in order to make best use of the product analytics tools in PTC, you need good data from your suppliers to start with. And that's what the BOMcheck system is all about. We believe that the best way to get good quality data from suppliers is to give the suppliers benefits, help the suppliers to make their declarations to you as customers. So we have a number of benefits that the BOMcheck system provides. Firstly, all of the manufacturers in BOMcheck share one database system and one list of restricted and declarable substances for regulatory compliance. So this means that the suppliers can use one database system to publish their data to multiple different customers in one go. And also, they only have to work through one list of restricted and declarable substances instead of having to fill out one list for Siemens, one list for Philips, one list for GE Healthcare, and others. The system also gives guidance to suppliers. We find that many suppliers these days don't have the level of in-house chemistry knowledge or technical expertise that they need to understand the regulations in North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. At the time and the cost it would take for them to research that by themselves is quite significant. But if we can provide that expert guidance centrally through the BOMcheck system, then that helps suppliers to understand the regulations, to understand where the substances could be found in materials in their products, and therefore to make high-quality declarations to their customers. Very important for RoHS2, as we'll talk a lot about test reports later on, is that when the suppliers make their declarations in BOMcheck, they can attach evidence documents. One of the differences between BOMcheck and IMDS is that BOMcheck is an open system. You can use the BOMcheck system to send declarations to any of your customers, even if the customer is not on BOMcheck yet. It's important to see that the system generates declarations in different formats, including the 7052A XML, and that's what many customers are asking for these days. And lastly, we'll talk briefly today about the full materials declaration tool. Industry as a whole is moving towards full material declaration as the best way to deal with the ever-increasing list of regulated and declarable substances. And we have a very good full materials declaration tool that enables BOMcheck to calculate regulatory compliance declarations from the supplier's FMD data and keep those declarations up to date. I'm now going to hand back to Kelly, who will talk to you about RoHS2 timelines, compliance responsibilities, and technical documentation.
Great, thanks, Aidan. So let's jump into what's on everyone's mind, the new EU RoHS recast requirements. On July 1st, 2011, the directive was published. It becomes law July 21st, and member states take effect 2013. So the new edition now included are medical devices and large industrial equipment, categories 8 and 9. For category 8, medical devices are in scope July 22nd, 2014. In vitro diagnostic medical devices, not until 2016. Active implantable medical devices are exempt, and the annex contains exempted applications specific to medical devices. For Category 9, monitoring and control instruments are not in scope until 2014. Industrial monitoring and control instruments are in scope as of 2017. And the annex contains exempted applications specific to monitoring and control instruments. In addition, there's another category that's been added, Category 11, which has an implementation date of 2019. And it's all electrical and electronic equipment not covered by any of the other categories, which leaves a very open format for customers and companies to determine their compliance. So with the recast comes the addition of new requirements. CE mark, which is required to sell products in the EU, will now be tied to the RoHS compliance. In order to meet these requirements, companies need to do the following things. They need to draw up technical documents and implement the internal product controls in Module A of Annex 2. The technical documentation needs to include some of the following bullet points: a general description of the product, the bill of materials, any exams that have been carried out, like a materials assessment or a declaration from a supplier, and then any test reports that have been completed. Companies are now required to provide CE declarations of conformity. So manufacturers and importers need to keep technical documents and these declarations of conformity for 10 years as well. In addition, companies need to mark compliant products with the CE mark. They've got to have all of this information: the type, the batch, the serial number, manufacturer name, trademark, and a contact address. Here's a sample of what a declaration of conformity might contain for information. So you want to look at having a name and address of your manufacturer, the object of the declaration. It needs to be signed on behalf of a company, dated, and then the name, function, and signature of the person verifying that it's compliant. With the RoHS recast, everyone has a role and responsibility now. Manufacturers, importers, and distributors all face business penalties for non-compliance. Manufacturers must produce technical documentation and implement internal production controls to conform with Module A of Annex 2. Manufacturers and importers are required to take immediate action for any product or part that they find on the market that's not compliant. They're responsible for putting together a withdrawal or a recall if it's appropriate. In addition, they need to inform member states when they're not compliant. One of the big changes is that distributors have a greater responsibility under RoHS2. If they believe a part or a product to be non-compliant, they need to take action as well and inform the member states. They need to ensure that a non-compliant product or part is part of a withdrawal or a product recall program. Regulators believe that by sharing this responsibility, it'll drive increased product compliance and conformance. With that high-level introduction, I'll give the mic back to Aidan, who will explain more about practical compliance management for RoHS2.
Thanks very much, Kelly. At this point, I'd like to thank Chris Smith, who's the UK RoHS regulator, who reviewed the slides I'm going to present over the next 10 minutes or so. But I'd also like to highlight that the guidance for RoHS2 has not been published yet. The EU regulators are still determining exactly how they will regulate RoHS2, and there are a number of open questions that still need to be resolved. So what I can give you today is the best of information that I have available at the moment on what the regulators' views are about RoHS2 compliance. But the regulators themselves are still in discussion about some aspects, and they will be publishing more detailed guidance in the coming months. Let's start, though, from Decision 768/2008. Now, if you haven't read this document, then you really should do so after the webinar today. So you should write down Decision 768/2008. That's the new CE marking requirements that all CE marking directives going forwards have to comply with. The RoHS directive states that manufacturers have to follow the CE marking requirements in Module A of Annex 2 of Decision 768/2008. This is a self-assessment approach. There is no requirement for you to involve a notified body or a certification organization. This is a process that you must carry out yourself, but you must be able to demonstrate to others, including distributors and member state regulators, that you have carried out this process and that you have the required documentation in place. I'm just reading out from the decision document itself, and it states that manufacturers shall establish the internal production controls, and that these shall be documented, including specific requirements for product design and manufacture. And I'm going to read this whole sentence out because it's important. The documentation shall make it possible to assess the product's conformity to the relevant requirements and shall include an adequate analysis and assessment of the risks. Now, there is some discussion about what that sentence means. One of the other elements, though, which is very clear in the Decision 768 is that the technical documentation shall include, wherever applicable, a general description of the product, the bill of materials, and examinations carried out, and also test reports. And I highlighted in red here the words wherever applicable and test reports. Now, this is the first time that test reports have ever been mentioned in the context of RoHS. In RoHS 1, there is no mention of test reports in the directive. In RoHS 2, now we do have a specific reference via the Decision 768. But the requirement is only to include test reports wherever applicable. So this means you do not need to carry out 100% testing of all components in a product. That would be impracticable. But you do need to have an explanation or justification of why you don't need test reports for certain parts and you do need them for others. We'll come back to that a little bit more in more detail in a few minutes. The general understanding amongst the regulatory community at the moment is that RoHS 2 does place a considerably increased burden of proof on industry, and that the technical file must include some form of assessment of the risks of compliance. So this means that you have to demonstrate in your technical file that you have assessed where the likelihood of non-compliance for your product will come from. Is it because you have a high-risk design? If you've got a design which includes a lot of materials that could include RoHS substances, a lot of PPC, for example, compared to another design, like a simple filament bulb torch, for example, that could, by its very nature, have materials that are much less likely to have RoHS substances in them? Or does the risk of non-compliance come from the supply chain? Are you sourcing components from very high-quality suppliers who will always provide you with good evidence and test reports? Of course, that's more expensive. Or are you sourcing components from cheaper suppliers, but you're choosing to do more in-house testing and inspection yourself? This level of understanding needs to be discussed in your technical file to explain where the risk of non-compliance lies for your products. And then your internal production controls reflect your understanding of that risk and demonstrate how you're going to manage your ongoing compliance. Now, as I said, the RoHS 2 guidance is not available yet. I'm going to start, though, by going back over the RoHS 1 guidance, because it does give us some useful pointers of what the regulators expected to be in place even for RoHS 1. But I want to emphasize that the RoHS 1 guidance must be used carefully because it does represent a much lower burden of proof. The two guidance documents that I'm referring to are the EU Member States RoHS Enforcement Guidance document of May 2006 and the UK RoHS Government Guidance Notes of February 2011, Annex D, which provide helpful clarification of some of the points in the Member States Enforcement Guidance document. So the Member State Enforcement Guidance talks specifically about the types of documents that manufacturers must gather to demonstrate compliance to the RoHS substance restrictions. So I'm quoting here from the Enforcement Guide document requirements list, and it refers to suppliers' warranties, certificates declaring that the use of restricted substances at permitted levels. Suppliers completed declarations for each part and justification of use of exemptions. Well, I often find that companies rely on declarations at the supplier level. In other words, one piece of paper signed by the supplier stating that everything they ever supply is RoHS compliant. Even under RoHS 1, that wasn't really what the regulators had in mind. But RoHS 1 also talks specifically about the manufacturer's assessment of suppliers' declarations to determine if they can be trusted. And this is the theme that was developed in RoHS 1 and which is now coming through much more strongly in RoHS 2 in the CE marking technical file, per the comments I mentioned earlier on about conformity risk assessment. So even in RoHS 1 in the guidance there was a suggestion that manufacturers should assess whether suppliers' declarations can be relied on, and should assess whether test reports are required depending on whether the parts contain high-risk materials and whether the supplier has good systems in place to ensure RoHS compliance. The RoHS 1 enforcement guidance gives a list of high-risk materials that the regulators have identified for particular focus. So as a very minimum, you need to have included these materials in your assessment of risk of materials in your product. So you need to look through the list of materials on this slide to see whether your product design includes any of these materials, which the regulators themselves under RoHS 1 regard as being at high risk of containing RoHS substances. Of course, the RoHS 2 list may be more comprehensive than this. The UK government guidance notes give some helpful guidance under RoHS 1 of how manufacturers can go about assessing suppliers to determine whether their statements can be trusted. The UK RoHS 1 guidance notes provide a risk assessment process based on supplier qualification. And again, in inverted commas here, this is where I'm quoting directly the text from the government guidance notes. So you can see that this refers to Type A suppliers, where your assessment of the supplier is a Type A supplier, where if you believe that the supplier has a very good understanding of RoHS, comprehensive and effective systems in place to ensure RoHS compliance, and shows that they carry out selective analysis of high-risk components and materials, then you could decide to accept all supplier self-declarations without requiring any further testing. On the other hand, if your assessment of your suppliers shows you that your suppliers do not understand RoHS, or don't have systems to ensure compliance and don't check incoming components, materials, or declarations, then your assessment should guide you to require recent sample test reports for all high-risk components and consider additional random sampling for other components. So that was RoHS 1, and as I said, RoHS 2 does represent a higher level of proof on manufacturers, and the RoHS 2 guidance is not available yet. So we only looked at RoHS 1 to give you an idea of what the regulators had in mind for compliance for RoHS 1. The reason why I've referred to that is because we see a lot of companies who haven't even implemented the RoHS 1 guidance per the regulators' expectations. RoHS 2 requires much more formal documentation of your processes and a much more formal and analytic approach to demonstrating your RoHS compliance. As I mentioned, your understanding of your product risk of non-conformity is what you would use to set the level of internal production control required for your products. So this is where you demonstrate your understanding of the risk of compliance for your products, whether it comes from the materials that you're using or the particular supply chains that you're using. And based on your assessment of the risk of non-compliance, you decide what internal production controls are appropriate. Now, internal production controls can include supplier audits, inspection of incoming materials, for example, by desk-based XRF inspection or other wet chemical techniques. So they can include actions that you take at your facilities, but in most cases they will also include some level of supplier management, where you will as part of your internal production control, set criteria for which suppliers are required to only provide self-declarations and which suppliers must also provide test reports. So although that's not an absolute requirement within RoHS, I would expect that most companies will establish internal production controls that involve some level of supply management. Of course, you could comply with RoHS by testing everything to death yourself when your suppliers' components arrive at your facilities. But most companies wouldn't choose to do that. They'll choose to require the suppliers to provide some proof of compliance to you. Now, the very important element here is once you've established your internal production controls and whatever mix of internal testing at your facilities and proof from suppliers, whatever mix you decide to go with, you have to document that and then you have to implement it. And that's really the fundamentals behind CE marking. You have to implement your procedures and you have to be able to prove to others that you have implemented them. So if you set up criteria for which suppliers are required to only provide self-declarations and which must also provide test reports, then you must ensure that you follow those criteria and that you only purchase parts from suppliers who can meet your documentation requirements. And you also need to check the documents that you are provided, particularly if the supplier provides you with test reports. Now, it may seem a basic thing to point out, but within your company, there needs to be a group or an individual who is responsible for checking the RoHS test reports that you receive from your suppliers. Somebody needs to be trained on how to read those reports and how to check whether the reports demonstrate that the components or the parts are RoHS compliant, whether they include measurements to demonstrate that the RoHS substances are not present above the threshold values in all homogeneous materials. And that means this may seem like an obvious thing, but who's going to do that? It probably won't be your purchasing manager, because your purchasing manager may not have the necessary training to review the test reports that your suppliers send to you. But you need to make sure that somebody has this responsibility so that it doesn't fall through the gaps. And believe me, it does fall through the gaps in some companies. I've been to several companies where I've asked to see the test reports, and the first test report I've looked at actually showed from the analytical results that the part was not RoHS compliant. But that was the first time within that company that that particular test report had been read. Once the company manager had picked his drawer up off the floor, he realized that it was important for somebody in the company to be responsible to review the test reports. Now, these are some slides that Chris Smith asked me to put in to illustrate, in his opinion, and of course the regulators are still discussing this, so I want to put a big caveat on this section, that this is still subject to decision by the EU RoHS regulators. But this is Chris Smith's opinion of how he expected a company to change the level of declarations and test reports that they would require for a typical product with a medium level of product risk. So he felt that under RoHS 1, where the good practice guidance recommends test reports where appropriate, in other words, it's for you to decide if you think it's appropriate to carry out or require test reports, then in many companies that results in the manufacturer only requiring test reports for high-risk materials from highest-risk suppliers. And the majority of other suppliers are required to provide some form of self-declarations. Now, Chris's opinion is that that same company manufacturing exactly the same product under RoHS 2, just watch the lines here as I move to this next slide, would expect a much higher level of testing and self-declaration from suppliers. Because under RoHS 2, the wording in RoHS 2 says that test reports are required wherever applicable. So if you don't include test reports, you have to explain why your criteria doesn't require you to have test reports for those parts. And that, because you're moving from a sort of where appropriate to a wherever applicable regime, in Chris's opinion, that means that he expects to see the level of sample testing at a typical company to increase considerably under RoHS 2. So not only would you test for high-risk materials from high-risk suppliers, but you would also consider testing for medium-risk materials from medium and high-risk suppliers and high-risk materials from low-risk suppliers, and you require self-declarations from the remainder. So just to summarize some main points from RoHS2. If the technical file does not require test reports for certain parts, and it doesn't, of course you cannot test for everything, but within your technical file you need to explain why test reports are not applicable for those parts, and that comes back to your explanation of your understanding of conformity risk for your products. Where does the risk lie? The conformity risk assessment is a very important part of your technical file, and it's what you use to justify your internal production controls. Now, this is the way it works. If you show that you have explained where you think the conformity risk lies, and then you have put in what you believe are appropriate production controls, then the regulator can't hold you at fault, because you've demonstrated a process and you've produced documentation to the best of your ability. Whether you've got the right answer or not is actually immaterial. You've actually been through the process and you've applied your best understanding. But it is important to have gone through that process and to document it in your technical file, so you can determine which suppliers should only provide self-declarations, which suppliers should also provide test reports, and of course what other checks you're going to carry out. If you choose to, for example, carry out supplier audits, or you have inspection of incoming materials, these can always be part of the internal production control procedures. However, in most cases, you will end up with some level of supplier management in terms of requiring declarations and test reports. And for RoHS2, that means you need a systematic approach. You need a systematic approach to gathering data from your suppliers and analyzing those declarations and those test reports. Now, why is that important? Why is RoHS2 a CE marking directive? Well, if you read the preamble to RoHS2, you'll see that the reason why the European Commission decided to make RoHS2 a CE marking directive is because, according to their research, around 40% of products coming into the EU are still not RoHS compliant. That's why they decided to toughen things up and make RoHS2 a CE marking requirement. Here's some examples from enforcement in Sweden and also enforcement in Holland. Now, this is results from the enforcement that the Swedish Chemicals Agency carried out in 2010 using handheld XRF to scan 129 products. Now, handheld XRF is actually very inaccurate. Desk-based XRF is more accurate, but handheld is pretty inaccurate. And what we're seeing here is gross non-compliance for lead. We're seeing not just a small amount of lead being picked up, representative of, for example, one component having some lead plating on some of the legs. We're talking about large amounts of lead being found in the products, which are representative of lead solder still being used in products. And this is after the Swedish Chemical Agency asked the companies if there are any reasons why the product should contain lead, for example, if it was covered by an exemption, and where they also carried out laboratory tests to check that the XRF scan was accurate, because XRF scanning can give you inaccuracies. So after both of those checks, they still found that around 20% of products were non-compliant for lead. The same findings came out of the inspection from the Dutch RoHS enforcement agency, VROM, who in 2009 scanned 450 products from 47 importers. They warned the importers in advance of the visits. At each importer, they picked up 10 products off the shelf, tested them using handheld XRF, asked the companies if there was any reason why that product should contain lead, and then backed up their testing with laboratory tests, and found that even with the handheld XRF, they were finding 20% of products non-compliant for lead. So this is one of the reasons why the European Commission has decided to make RoHS2 much more onerous on manufacturers and to extend responsibilities into the distribution chain as well. And as Kelly highlighted earlier, the RoHS2 does introduce a lot more business penalties for non-compliance, because now the manufacturers, importers, and distributors are all involved in a conversation about whether a non-compliant product should be withdrawn or recalled. And there's this requirement for disclosure to member states if you find a non-compliance. So, in summary, under RoHS1, manufacturers really only had to convince themselves that the product was RoHS compliant, and if they found a non-compliance, they could keep it to themselves and just try and fix it in-house. And even if the RoHS regulator found out about a non-compliance, you'll have known that there haven't been any high-profile court cases. There's been no articles in the trade press about this, or very, very few. So under RoHS1, the business penalties for non-compliance were pretty low. I mean, the UK turned back £30 million worth of products last year. Well, £30 million worth of products for non-RoHS compliance is a drop in the ocean. And I could understand, though I could not condone it, why many companies could decide to just take the risk. Under RoHS2, if you have a non-compliance, then it immediately becomes communicated to member states and to your distributors, and you suddenly have this really painful discussion with your distributors about whether a product recall or withdrawal is appropriate. And of course, under RoHS2, you have to provide your technical documentation on request to your distributors and to the member states. So you have to be able to prove to others that your products are RoHS compliant. We've talked about the technical file needing to include test reports, and I've explained how you should use your conformity risk assessment to set criteria for which of your suppliers you decide should provide test reports. The conclusion is that in order to be able to convince others and to meet the CE marking requirements for RoHS2, you need a systematic approach to gathering and analyzing declarations and test reports from suppliers. The big challenge faced by industry at the moment is that suppliers provide declarations in many different formats. I routinely see suppliers who say, here's my PDF document, here's my Word document, here's my Excel spreadsheet, here's my piece of paper with my handwritten signature on it. That's incredibly difficult for a company to roll up and analyze it to the product level. If you want to do systematic analysis at the product level, you need your declarations data to be in the same format. So the recommendation from today's webinar is that you need centralized shared web databases to manage supplier declarations, to gather the data from suppliers, aggregated together in the first place. So you end up receiving high-quality declarations from your suppliers in a manageable way, in data formats that you can actually do something with. And then you need some of the powerful tools from PTC to carry out the product analytics and to roll that data up to assess compliance at the product level. As you know, I'm co-chair of the IPC 7052A standard for declarations data, and I would recommend that as being industry best practice for companies to use. There are other standards you can use. The important thing is to use one of the international standards. IPC 7052A is the leading standard, that's what we recommend, but the important thing is to have your data in an industry standard format. And if you can do that, then if you can implement these shared web databases, you get improved data quality and response from your suppliers, then you'll find it much easier for you, much lower business cost for you to roll up your compliance data, analyze it within products like PTC, Winchell Products Analytics, to produce the required technical files for RoHS2. I'd like to pass back to Kelly now to talk about some of the best practice recommendations for how Winchell Products Analytics can roll up your data to produce the technical files.
Thanks, Aidan. And that was a great summary of the RoHS requirements. So now let's discuss some of PTC's best practice recommendations and how product analytics can help avoid stop shipments and fines for companies. First, why do we have the best practices? Well, because it's all about reducing risk and having the data to make informed decisions. Here's a few of our key customers. Let's start by sharing some of our customer success stories for RoHS compliance. Each company was seeking certain benefits when implementing a system to manage the process. So with Seagate, we reduced compliance data collection costs more than 50%, reduced the reporting cost by 50%, and reduced the time to create the reports. For Seagate, it was all about cost, time, and reporting. For Motorola, we reduced the compliance assessment time from weeks to minutes, collected data for 300,000 parts from 4,400 suppliers, and reduced the regulatory risk, protecting their $22 billion in revenue. For them, it was all about time, comprehensive data collection, and revenue protection. Then APC, we reduced cost of data collection and management by $2 million, made their data collection possible. We helped them establish due diligence, which protected $600 million in shipments to Europe and reduced overall program costs by 80%. For APC, it was about better data collection strategies, having an audit trail for due diligence, and a reduction in compliance costs. And then Microsoft, great quote here from Joan. This tool's made a tremendous difference to our compliance status and the ability to keep up with the myriad of changing regulations. You continue to be critical to our success. So with Microsoft, it was really about strong partnership, better reporting, and maintenance of regulations. Common themes, clearly, data acquisition. A large number of environmental performance data can be managed and stored within product analytics. We have modules for materials and substances, mass, disclosure, cost, just to name a few. But what's the right strategy? It really depends on your individual company's needs, and it's usually dependent on your budget, your resources, and your risk. Product analytics is flexible enough to use many inputs. You can see data integration with reference sources. If you have existing data in your company, whether it be Excel spreadsheets or Word, we can integrate that into the system. In addition, we work with a lot of industry expert data collection services, BOMcheck being a primary data collection service, IMDS for automotive, and then commercially companies like IHS, QPoint, Total Parts Plus, Granta, and EcoInvent for LCA. In addition, we have an out-of-the-box solution that can generate requests directly to the suppliers, and as a data management strategy, date and timestamp for when you send that request, manage that request, reject and approve it, as well as upload it into the system. Third, if you still need additional help, we also have services team that can work with you to build a plan for data collection. And as many of you know, we have a free tool that we offer called the 1752 Builder at 1752builder.com, and it helps suppliers actually generate that XML for the 1752 format. So another huge concern is managing exemptions. And managing exemptions is key to compliance. So in addition to disclosure and compliance, Product Analytics actually has an exemption management process that allows customers to select and suppliers to select appropriate exemptions for their parts. We also manage the regulatory changes to those exemptions and keep a history of the exemptions used in the past. So you can take a snapshot in time, see what your exemptions were 2 years ago, and see what they are today. So how can a company stay current with RoHS revisions and exemption expirations? Windchill Product Analytics keeps companies up to date with the changes. We incorporate the RoHS revision changes as well as any changes in exemptions. We've already included the September 24th, 2010 exemptions into our product, and you can do a history prior to September 24th. The system also reflects RoHS exemption expirations, so many of you know that the new exemption list that came out September 24th has dates associated, expiration dates associated with each exemption, and we do manage that. We track those expiration dates in the system and then alert customers within the software when those dates are coming up and to do a review. With full material disclosure, manufacturers can automatically update RoHS compliance based on the most recent exemption changes, so without repolling your supply chain for new part status. We definitely recommend full material disclosure to all of our customers because it's less time that you need to go back to the supply chain when new regulations come out or changes to the regulation. So then, how does a company ensure compliance across all products? Well, clearly it's about rolling up the BOM to view status for the product across multiple regulations. With product analytics, you can share compliance results with stakeholders across the enterprise. A BOM status report is one way to share that information. Building compliance into the earliest phases of production is key. Integrating that with your PLM and your ERP processes ensure that you'll be able to prevent defects and cost overruns as well as schedule slips in the future. We ensure compliance by enabling a design for compliance process. So explore the compliance status of design alternatives. Try what-if scenarios. Try trade-offs. And all of this allows companies to demonstrate product compliance and due diligence for customers and government authorities. The key thing here is that you have an audit trail backed by real data. So why is this so complex? It's complex because our customers need to make environmental design decisions early in the product development lifecycle. It's complex because customers need full and accurate data from their suppliers, and they need to have the ability to do checks against that data. It's complex because the BOMs are complex. They have options, variants, configurations, substitutes, alternatives. And it's complex because it's too much to manage manually. So let's discuss what PTC sees as compliance best practices. There are 4 key process steps that product analytics helps customers with: defining targets, acquiring data, analyzing the data, and taking action. So let's take a look at each of those real quick. Defining targets. Defining at-risk materials and supplier risk criteria. It's all about figuring out where your risks are and then going after the data. The second step, acquire the data. Collect and validate your reference data. Know what's in the BOMs, the AMLs, the parts, the materials, test reports. Know what's missing. A key piece of this is knowing what you have for data and what you don't. Analyze the data. So analyze product exemptions, supplier risk, and product material risk to create a conformity risk assessment and a compliance status report. So the conformity risk assessment is new to RoHS2. Compliance status reports, clearly we've all had to do in the past. Analyzing that risk lets you know where you're at risk. Produce reports. So taking action, producing reports, technical documents, demonstrating product compliance. The key thing here is being able to share those results across your enterprise, whether it's your PLM or your ERP. And for non-compliant or high-risk products, evaluate the trade-offs. Make those product changes or obtain those test results early on before you get to release to manufacturing. So if we move from the best practices of compliance to the best practices for technical document creation, we see that we've covered compliance, but if we focus on technical documentation, it's important to know what's in your product and where those potential risks are. So setting a product conformity risk assessment target is key. Set your criteria for that supplier risk. You need to know what your level of disclosure is. You need to know if you've had risks prior to that. And you need to know which parts and products you actually need test reports for. Defining at-risk materials. Clearly, as Aidan mentioned before, we need to begin to define our test report strategy and what that process looks like. We need to plan to rely on our suppliers to provide those test reports. So we need tighter relationships with suppliers and better ways to pass the data back and forth. We need to create test reports for internally manufactured parts when applicable. If your company actually makes the parts that you're using, then you're on the hook to create that same documentation that a supplier would make for you. You need to manage those test reports in a compliance system so you have that audit trail, as well as do QA checks whether or not those test reports have been read and how accurate they are. Product analytics does this. It helps you automate creation of the technical documents by doing roll-ups of the parts of the BOM and producing a product-level compliance and risk analysis report. And lastly, we can't forget managing the CE declaration of conformity. So managing that declaration conformity in a system and then being able to maintain that history over a 10-year period and report back. Key to success. So product analytics is a modular platform. It helps you look across dimensions of your product and find potential risks, determine your trade-offs, and help manage the compliance process. It's important for companies to be able to look at these different dimensions. Product analytics can help your company share information across the enterprise and then accept input data from a variety of sources. BOMcheck is one of those sources providing high-quality data to product analytics. With that, I'd like to turn it back over to Aidan.
Thanks, Kelly. I'd like to pick up on some of the themes that Kelly's mentioned about the need to obtain high-quality declarations from suppliers in the first place and to ensure that you can keep that data up to date by getting good response rates from suppliers when the regulations change, when exemptions change, and when substance regulations change, for example, for the REACH regulations for candidate list substances. So the purpose behind the BOMcheck system is to facilitate the sharing of high-quality supplier declarations between multiple different customers in the supply chain. The 290 or so manufacturers using BOMcheck all share the same web database system and the same list of substances. It's the same IT system that suppliers log into and can manage their data to their different customers. The industry steering group directs the development of the new functions and features on BOMcheck and coordinates joint RoHS suppliers. The substances working group within BOMcheck, again driven by industry, manages the single list of restricted and declarable substances, for example, as new substances are added to REACH, and manages the updates when the RoHS exemptions change and other requirements change globally. And having a shared system like this, which reaches right across the supply chain, saves time and cost for suppliers and ensures that manufacturers can achieve higher quality data from their suppliers and a faster response rate at lower cost. This is some of the 290 or so manufacturers who are using BOMcheck to manage supplier regulatory compliance. And this is a geographic spread of distribution of suppliers showing that the largest number of suppliers we have in the system are in China, followed by the US and Germany. It's very important that our system is available in Chinese so that the Chinese suppliers can understand the regulatory requirements and use tools to fill in their declarations and generate the 7052 XMLs. So the tool is designed to interface with PLM systems like Visual Product Analytics to feed those product analytics systems with high-quality supplier data. The key to getting high-quality data from suppliers is to provide benefits to suppliers. You need to provide training to suppliers. We provide 2 levels of training: an introduction webinar, which explains the regulations and demonstrates the BOMcheck system, and also an expert user webinar, which gives a detailed demonstration of all the regulatory compliance tools that the supplier can use in BOMcheck to make their declarations. So as well as explaining the regulations, you also need to give support to suppliers to help them understand what these restricted and declarable substances are and where the substances could be found in materials in their products. So that's a very important part of the system, is to guide suppliers through making their regulatory compliance declarations and assist them to make full materials declarations. Because, for example, the 7 new candidate list substances added to the REACH candidate list, only 2 of those substances, DHNUP and DIHP, can be found in materials used in parts in the electronics industry. Now, if you explain that to suppliers and you tell them what types of materials could contain those substances, then you're much more likely to get high-quality declarations from the suppliers that are accurate and you can rely on. I've highlighted it's important to provide language support. All of the tools in BOMcheck are available in Chinese and English. The user guides are available in Chinese, Japanese, German, and English, and all the tools will be available in German and Japanese later this summer and into autumn. Full materials declaration is the future. More and more customers are moving towards full materials declaration as the best way of managing this rapidly changing list of substances for declaration requirements. We have probably one of the best industry tools available for suppliers to make full materials declarations by specifying each substance in each material by selecting from a searchable list of 524,000 substance names. And then that data, once it's stored in BOMcheck uses that to calculate a regulatory compliance declaration and to keep that regulatory compliance declaration up to date as new substances are added to the regulations in the future. A very important associated benefit is that suppliers can control the confidentiality of their data. This is particularly important for companies in the supply chain like plastic resin suppliers who will not want to give you the recipe of the substances in their resin, but they would be happy to store their full materials declarations in BOMcheck and use BOMcheck to calculate a regulatory compliance declaration that their customers can see. So if you take many of the customers in BOMcheck, they don't actually need to see the full materials data from suppliers, but they do need to know that the regulatory compliance declarations that they can access from BOMcheck are generated from full materials data, and so will always be up to date. So the customer doesn't need to chase the suppliers every 6 months as REACH substances change or as RoHS exemptions expire. Another important element for companies, larger companies who have their own part numbering system, many companies do have their own part numbering system, is that the BOMcheck tool has a mapping function which enables the customer to map their part number against a supplier's part number. By establishing that relationship, this means your BOMs can be expressed in terms of your own internal part numbers, but those internal part numbers pull the necessary supplier's data to show that your internal part numbers are compliant to the regulations. From the manufacturer's point of view, the benefits of the system are that we have flexible options for you to access your supplier's data. Most companies start by using a manual approach to manually download data for a list of part numbers that you buy from your suppliers. And then once they become happy with the manual approach, they move towards an automated system where you can connect BOMcheck directly to your PLM system, for example, to Windshield Products Analytics using our API or AS2 interfaces so that the data is automatically downloaded from BOMcheck into your PLM system. But the important thing for customers is centralized management of suppliers and supplier data. Instead of you having to go out to your suppliers individually or through third parties, the BOMcheck system can manage contact to all suppliers in a central approach. So all suppliers' data can be updated centrally when the list of RoHS exemptions changes or new substances become regulated under REACH. We can provide guidance and training to suppliers centrally on all of those regulatory changes. And the tool enables suppliers to recertify their regulatory compliance declarations very easily. Suppliers can choose to recertify all of their data for particular substances in the system in one go, or they can choose particular parts lists to recertify parts list by parts list. Customers can choose to receive email notifications from BOMcheck giving them an Excel spreadsheet of their suppliers that have joined the system in the past hour, 24 hours, week, month, whichever time period you want to track suppliers joining the system who are supplier to your company. And you can store a watch list of part numbers that you want to track. BOMcheck will send you an Excel spreadsheet to give you details of any part numbers on your lists that suppliers have added or changed since your last watch list statement. This is the regulatory compliance declaration tool. I'm sure you're not too surprised to see that it includes all of the regulations in North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. What we've done, though, in this tool is that we have built in the function to allow a supplier to make a declaration for a list of part numbers, and that's an important element that was missing in the old PDF forms, where you had to make a declaration one part number at a time. Within BOMcheck, you can make a declaration for a list of part numbers that all have the same compliance status. So we're working with a large supplier of electronic components. They have 49,000 different part numbers, but those 49,000 parts fall under 4 different compliance statuses. And so the company can load all their 49,000 part numbers into the BOMcheck system using only 4 lists and manage those 4 lists on a regular basis to keep their data up to date in the system. And that data is immediately available to all of their customers. This is a snapshot of the Full Materials Declaration tool. There are a couple of points to mention here is that we use the JAMP materials group to identify the homogeneous material in the part. If you're dealing with the Japanese, then you'll know that the list of material groups in JAMP is mandatory for the Japanese JAMP system. It's also important if you want to use your full materials, full materials data for lifecycle analysis. You don't want to have to rejig or reformat suppliers' data to fit into a standard list of material groups. To make the benefit to use tools like the PTC Lifecycle Analysis Suite, it really helps to have your supplier's data using standard material groups, because then you can more easily calculate a lifecycle analysis footprint or a carbon footprint for your product. You can see also that the BOMcheck tool includes trade names and chemical names for substances. So if you ask your supplier, do you have any diacetyl phthalate in your part, they may not have heard of that substance, may have no idea. But if you ask your supplier to fill in BOMcheck and they put in Hatcol or Codaflex, which are common trade names for diacetyl phthalate, and of course diacetyl phthalate is one of the rich catalyst substances, then the supplier can find out, oh right, okay, so that substance is declarable. I didn't realize that. Okay. So it helps suppliers to fill in their full materials declaration, and the tool obviously validates the regulatory compliance declaration that BOMcheck calculates from that full materials data. And for full materials data, as I've explained, it's very important that suppliers can choose to make the full material declaration confidential only to themselves or to selected customers in the system, and can allow other customers in the system to see the regulatory compliance declaration that BOMcheck calculates from the full materials data. Thanks very much for your time. I'm sure Kelly and I now have a couple of minutes where we could address any questions that you have to PTC or to BOMcheck. I'll pass over to Kelly, and hopefully you'll be positioned to answer the first couple of questions.
Sure. Okay.
All right.
The moderator?
Yes. Kelly and Aidan, thank you for your presentations today. We do have one question for each of you. I know that we have a couple questions in the queue. However, due to time constraints, we'll probably end up taking those offline and answering those individually. So the first question I have for Kelly is, can I use the data I collected for RoHS or RoHS2 to measure compliance for other regulations with wind chill product analytics?
Good question. The answer is yes. So all the data that gets collected can be analyzed against multiple regulations that we support, as well as LCA cost and then some custom analytics. The more data you have, if it's full material disclosure, the more analytics you can do against it. Getting that full material disclosure from the suppliers is really the key part. So product analytics can check for disclosure and compliance using the same data.
All right. Perfect. Now I have one for you, Aidan, as well.
Okay.
Will it be possible for companies to CE mark a product before the enforcement date of January 2013? Excuse me.
Okay. So many products that fall under categories 1 to 7 and 10 of the RoHS directive already carry the CE mark for other European directives, for example, the Low Voltage Directive or EMC. These products will continue to be CE marked after January 2013 with no change in the CE marking. So you don't put a second CE mark on the product. But what it means is that after January 2013, the CE mark that is on your product means that not only do you comply with directives that applied to you before January 2013, like EMC and low voltage, but now you are stating your compliance to the RoHS2 directive as well. So, turning that question around, many companies' products are already marked with the CE mark for compliance to other regulations, and after January 2013, those products which are marked with the CE mark, you're stating that they also comply to RoHS. Now, you will be able to mark products which are not currently covered by other CE marking directives before January 2013, and in fact it will be very important for you to do so, because the obligations on distributors apply as well from the 3rd of January 2013. So the requirement for distributors to only sell product that is CE marked after January 2013 applies immediately that the enforcement date of 3rd of January 2013 takes effect. So if you think about distribution channels, it can take many months for a product to end up on the shelf of a distributor, which means that particularly for overseas manufacturers in America or China, for example, they will need to be shipping product that is compliant to the RoHS2 requirements, probably sometime summer 2012, so that distributors can resell those products from the 3rd of January 2013. So in practice, we're seeing a lot of companies in China, for example, already starting now to get the technical files together and to consider CE marking the products, because they recognize it'll take months for those products to arrive in Europe, and that under the legislation, distributors cannot sell products in Europe after the 2nd of January 2013 date in categories 1 to 7 and 10 if the products are not CE marked.
All right, thank you. Now again, we will be answering the rest of those questions that have been coming in individually after the webcast. So I'd like to let our audience know at this point that for joining the webcast today, you'll receive a complimentary copy of the PTC White Paper, Managing the Business Risks of Product Environmental Performance. This white paper focuses on the challenges companies face and the best practices you can employ when collecting substance, material, and compliance data for your suppliers and supply chain. Keep an eye out for this via email. I'd also like to let you know about our new Product Analytics Resource Center. This webpage is devoted to showing you how you can meet the critical product requirements early on in the product development cycle. Visit the site and you'll find reference materials like topic sheets, analyst reports, and webcasts. Go to ptc.com/go/product analytics. And if you're interested in future webcasts, PTC is running a web